All right,
Here we go. Okay. Welcome to the Atheist Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of both skeptics and believers who get together to discuss important books from both perspectives. So we do alternate. I know a lot of people are new here, so we do alternate books. So we do like this month we're doing a Christian, an atheist book. Last month we did a Christian book, and we're going to do another Christian book next month. We do atheist Christian book. My name is James Walker. I'm the co-founder. I'm the Christian half of the equation. I'm the president of Watchman Fellowship and Evangelical Apologetics Ministry. Our other co-founder right next to me is Bill Cluck. Bill Cluck's a former Christian, now atheist. You were the one that recommended the book that we're looking at.
Well, actually, it was Ken Daniels, because I read Deconstructing Jesus, which was highly esoteric. Very interesting book, but very tough book to read. But fortunately, we had Ken, who knows all about this stuff, and he said, do Beyond Born Again. Fantastic. So anyway...
So yeah, we're going to be looking at Beyond Born Again, and we also got to do, we try to do this every time, but we did get to do a video broadcast, a conference call over video with the author. We always give the club a chance to ask questions. You've already read part of the book or all the book. You've got 3 good questions or whatever. Then we try to get interaction with the authors, and we've had quite a few of them, and we've actually, I think 3 or 4 times, we've had the author of the book actually here in the room with us, and we're going to get to do that next month, or our next club meeting, I should say. Hopefully that's going to work out all right. So anyway, welcome to the book club. How many? This is your first time to be here? So about almost half. Yeah, right. Excellent. So we usually wait till the break to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it right now. I've got 2 big announcements, and I've been waiting to hopefully build it and let the cat out of the bag. But we've been
got a big mouth.
Been wanting to talk about this. I'm real excited about both of these opportunities. I did mention this earlier. This particular one over next door in Fort Worth at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. They're having an annual apologetics conference, and they usually feature a debate. And this time the debate's going to be between Doug Guyvette and Michael Roos. And we're going to have, this is going to be on March 22nd, a couple of weeks from now. And we're going to take a group over. We're going to have like a field trip over there. You will get extra credit if you come. It would be it will help greatly reduce your annual dues. There are no dues, but anyway. Let me just, how many of you already know Doug Guyvette, or you've heard the name Michael Roos? Okay, some of us have. Let me kind of give you the background real quickly, and then I've got a special thing I want to do about it. So Doug Guyvette has his PhD from the University of Southern California. His dissertation was on the logic of the problem of evil. He's currently professor of philosophy at Biola. He's written a number of books, including A Rejoinder to Flu's Presumption of Atheism. That was a contribution in the book God Matters. You might remember Anthony Flew was one of the books that we read in the book club. He did go from being an atheist to being a deist before his death. Traitor. So, and then Michael Roos is an atheist, has his PhD from University of Bristol in philosophy of science. His specialty is how science interacts with religion. And I've seen him speak at in New Orleans at the big Greer Herd conference. Both of these guys are really on the academic level when it comes to discussing these things philosophically. He's from the UK. He's a Canadian citizen, but he actually teaches currently at Florida State University. A couple of the books he's done is Can a Darwinian Be a Christian? The Relationship Between Science and Religion. He did that book in 2001, and then more recently, 2016, he did Darwinism as Religion. What literature tells us about evolution. So they're going to be doing a debate right next door over at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. We've got a long time, our ministry, Watchman, has a long time relationship with the seminary. In fact, probably 10 or 12 years ago, we took our whole library and it became a special collection at the seminary. And a massive library that they now maintain and do that for us. We greatly appreciate that. So I was able to get some special pricing and make available, I think the tickets are, I think, $35 or $40 for the whole conference. For the debate, I was able to get a special pricing, and so I've got 10 tickets that I'm going to give away for free. This is your dues in action, folks. And Ken has already claimed one of them, and we're going to make sure he gets, we pass that down to him right there. And only take it if you're going to be able to go. But if you want to be part of it, I think the debate only is
It's Friday night.
It's Friday night. Was that 3 Fridays from tonight?
22nd.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
22nd.
What's
Yeah.
the time?
What's that?
What's the time?
I think it starts at 5. The debate does.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
we went as a group to see Michael Shermer debate. Who was it?
Mark Reynolds.
Yeah, John Mark Reynolds. That was fascinating. So I expect a really good debate, and want to encourage you to be part of that. So does anybody? It's going to be first come, first served. Does anybody
I will
want
go.
one?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll
Neil,
go.
are you in?
I'm already registered, so.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Maybe you can get your money back.
I'll go, yeah.
Yeah, be sure I get back what's left. They've got numbers on them that we've got to be able to.
Yeah, it's really nice of James to do this. I mean,
I'm trying to talk my pastor into going, so that'll be interesting.
James, you never ask for money, but I know that Watchman Fellowship does have a donation button.
Just pass it on.
Yeah, we do have a donation that goes, if that's a specific one, to offset, you know, just the club. We have one for our, we have a Mormons in Transition next Friday. We do the same with that too, so thanks a lot. So that's one thing we're excited about, and looking forward to that. It's going to be early enough that we might can go grab a cup of coffee and pick up where the debate left off. And I'm sure I'll have some better arguments than Doug Ivette comes up with. So, anyway, so I'm looking forward to that. Excited about that. And then I want to tell you about our next book. Our next book is going to be "Stealing from God" by Frank Turk. Frank is holds a doctorate of ministry and apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte. He's the co-author, along with Norm Geisler, of the book "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." That's probably his best-known book.
See, I guessed him.
Huh?
I guessed him.
Yes,
I told
yes.
you Frank Turk.
He has defended. I did a good guess. I didn't want to say you got it. He has defended the Christian worldview in numerous public forums, including he's held debates with Michael Shermer, debates with Christopher Hitchens, with David Silverman, and he's going to be speaking earlier that day at UTA, right next door to us. And this is one of the ways is. So he's going to come over here and go up and have a little time of rest up in our upper room right before the book club starts. And he'll be joining us in person. So this is one of the few times we get the author himself here. And so he'll be doing his, defending his book, Stealing from God. So he'll be sitting right up here at the front taking your questions.
yeah, this is the biggest celebrity we've ever had.
So he's got a pretty good social media, you know, so the word gets out. So again, because you guys are here, before we were famous, you get first shot. So when if you want to hold your spot, because we have had 2 book clubs that we had to say no. And we were full. That room was full. This room, the hall. People were in the kitchen trying to listen, and we said no, we can't take anybody else. So this could be another one. I would expect to be closer to that. So what I do before we get to our book, which we're going to be talking about, Beyond Born Again. I did get a 3-minute clip from a promo where Frank talks about his book and what he tries to do in the book. So this will give you a taste of what the book's like. Let's just watch that video now.
All right, let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going through the book, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, and we'll review a little bit what we did in previous sessions. This is a big problem with young people. They go off to college, and before you know it, they're saying, "Dad, hey, I don't believe in God anymore." And there are many arguments that they think they get when they go off to college that somehow point to atheism. But let's look at this problem another way. Here's how we're going to look at it. Question: What if your best arguments to doubt God show that He really exists? What if your best arguments to doubt God show that He really exists? That's kind of the premise of the book. In fact, these are many of the arguments that atheists bring up to say God doesn't exist. Well, we're the reasonable ones, and reason is atheistic. We're all about science, and science points away from God. Evolution shows there is no God. There's too much evil in the world, and God is evil, and the God of the Old Testament's evil. And look, atheists are more moral, and I consider atheism to be more moral than any other religious viewpoint, said Christopher Hitchens. Now, are these arguments for atheism? No, they actually are stolen from God Himself. These arguments actually point back to God. None of these things would exist unless God existed. And what do I mean by that? The book, as you know, goes through crimes. That's the acronym. All of these things over here, causality, reason, information, morality, evil, and science, they're all immaterial things. And as you know, the dominant view among atheists today is what? Everything's material. There are no immaterial realities. We're just molecules in motion. We're nothing but moist robots. Well, if that's the case, how do any of these things exist? Because every one of these things have an immaterial aspect to them that can't be explained by materialism. We put it this way: atheists are materialists, yet all these aspects of reality are immaterial and grounded in God. Therefore, when atheists cite any of them to support atheism, they are stealing from God in order to argue against Him. Now, some people have a problem with this word grounded. What do you think this word grounded means? The foundation. It's the foundation? Or God is the source? Yeah, it's the basis. You can't get under Him. He is the foundation, like a foundation of a house, you know. You can't get under the foundation of the house, otherwise you're in dirt. I mean, as part of the house, that's the bottom of the house. Well, the bottom of all these things is God's nature. And that's why none of these things actually point to atheism. They point right back to at least theism. And you have to do more work to see if it's Christian theism.
It gives you an idea of what the book's about, and we'll have time to read that, pick that apart. I usually send out, if you're on our mailing list or if you're on our text list, if you'd like to be on the text list, if you'll give me your name and your cell phone number, then you'll get the probably 2 or 3 times a month, I will send you a text with a link where you can have access to the book. This month we had a link to be able to get the book for free, but I'll let you know that information. So, also want to say hello to anybody who's listening, watching on Facebook Live channel. We will be, Chris here is going to be monitoring that. If you have a question, you're watching on Facebook Live. He's not texting his girlfriends. He is actually monitoring, for the most part, monitoring our Facebook Live. And so, hey, if you want to have a question or make a comment, we do ask for it to be respectful. We try for that, and then we will. Chris will, ask the group or put that question out before us. So, again, our book is Beyond Born Again. How many got to read the book or part of the book? How many of you? Okay, part of it. And then I also gave you that debate. If you didn't have time, I always try to give you a YouTube link to watch something. If you don't have time to finish the book, you can at least have an idea of what the book's going to be about by watching the YouTube, debate. I think in this case it was a debate. Robert Price is he's a character in a lot of ways. He's very interesting. He's extremely intelligent. He was one of us. I'm speaking as a Christian. He was minimal evangelical, if not even borderline fundamentalist. Very conservative Christian, who, in the course of his education and just life experiences, began to have doubts and questions. But we catch the book. The book was actually the first book he wrote in the mid-90s. So it's interesting that we get a snapshot of where he was, not now, but where he was in 1995, I think it was. And at that point, he had just recently been a pastor of a church, and he was still identifying himself as being a Christian of sorts. In fact, that's where the title Beyond Born Again. So you can be a Christian, to be a nominal Christian, maybe a born-again Christian. Well, there's this higher level Christian. You can be beyond born-again Christian. And so The irony is, though, he has progressed so far beyond that now that he not only is an atheist, he is probably one of maybe the leading mythicist. The mythicists believe in the Christ myth theory that Jesus never existed, period. Not that he wasn't God, he wasn't even a man. He never existed, and that, that this is based on basically legend. So he's written whole books on the topic of mythicism. And so one of the questions I got to ask him was, and I'll let you hear the answer, but is this like way beyond born again? Like, how many light years past born again are you? So, but he explains that in our interview that we did back on Monday. We'll play portions of that here in a little bit. So, any thoughts? I know you shared it last month or a month before, Ken, but you're the one that really recommended this. Good choice, I think. Good choice of a book. Could you remind us, for the new people here, what role that played for you when you were a Christian? You're not now, you're an atheist now, but you were a missionary with Wycliffe, and you came across, was it about this time you came across Robert Price?
It was in March of 2000, 19 years ago.
Okay.
So we were in a linguistic workshop in the country of Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou, the capital. We were there for 4 weeks, and I was searching for an apologist to help me with some of the questions I had as I was reading through the Old Testament in my devotional. So I searched for Clark Pinnock, and lo and behold, well, the internet was new back then, at least in Africa. We had dial-up, and you could sometimes get on the internet. So I downloaded this book because I just happened across it and read it, and I had never read anything from a non-evangelical perspective before that challenged the evangelical perspective. And it was like it was a dagger in the heart of my faith at that time. I was already struggling, so this just kind of, put an end to it.
Now, I shared, this didn't make the cut because we had some audio problems when I was doing the interview, but I mentioned that you had found him that way, and that I think you said that if he'd come across saying, I'm an atheist, I don't believe this stuff, maybe you would have hesitated to.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't at a point, I was definitely not an atheist at that point. I was doubting the Bible. You can still believe in God and doubt the Bible, and the Bible's inerrancy. But as a Wycliffe missionary, I had to subscribe to inerrancy. You have to sign on the dotted line every time you go back to, on furlough and then go back to the field, you got to sign a statement. And I just didn't feel like I could sign it anymore after reading this book.
Wow.
So it was a long, convoluted process.
So you couldn't like cross your fingers and.
Yeah.
Well, what did he say in the book, Ken, that was the most salient point?
Well, I mean, again, my own doubts cropped up from the reading of the Bible itself, but I'd always fallen back on apologetics. Well, this and that and the other, all these stock apologetics that you always hear, kind of gave me, pause to prevent me from jumping the ship. But he just skewered the whole enterprise of apologetics.
Was it the legend thing, the eyewitness testimony, all the
the resurrection, just the whole tactics of apologists, and
Did you feel like he was doing apologetics at the same time, though?
There was a little bit of disingenuousness, especially at the end of the book, where he talks about a path for evangelicals to a certain version of evangelicalism. I thought he not being evangelical, that was a little bit disingenuous to talk about a path for evangelicals to remain evangelicals. Sort of like what was his name that we did recently, the agnostic who was trying to.
Oh yes, yeah, I know what you're talking about. He wrote The Devil's Delusion. The Devil's Delusion.
David Berlinski.
Yeah. So if you're going to be something, advocate that position. Don't advocate some other position halfway in between.
Explain why he seemed disingenuous to you, for those that didn't get to read The Devil's Delusion.
Oh, well, I mean, he portrays himself, Berlinski does, as an agnostic, and yet all of his arguments were very theistic oriented. We're putting, evidence for God. Well, if you're trying to give arguments for God, why aren't you a theist?
Because he gets checks from the Discovery Institute, which he says, I'll be glad to. But you and me both, Ken and Chris, were true. I mean, I was born again when I was 17, And when died, Christ,
it didn't take.
well, when Christ died on the cross and before the foundation of the world. So I'm in. You know, I don't care. I mean, when were you born again?
4 years old.
4? Okay, I was 17. When were you born again?
5.
You're kidding.
Wow.
Whoa. Okay. So, what caused you, Chris, to kind of leave? And you read the book, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting to see how much of what he was talking about was how I would have identified when I was a believer, and I almost feel like I have maybe some in common with some of the evangelicals in this room who read this book, in that I read his kind of attempts to come up with a liberal compromise, and was like, that would never work. That's getting too far away from the Bible. I don't even have a horse in this race.
Yeah, yeah.
But
the thing is, as a Christian, my thing is, you read about the German scholarship. He loves German scholarship, the 19th century heroes.
Schleiermacher.
Yeah, and Strauss, where they say, the great D mythologizers that say, hey, we can believe in a historical Jesus. Let's just leave the walking on water and the, healing people and, of course, raising from the dead.
But the irony is he's so enamored with Rudolf Bultmann, etc., but now he doesn't believe in the historical Jesus either. So he departs from all his heroes in that regard.
Right. So you want to go beyond the basics. When you're born again, you just learn to trust the Bible. And then when you grow, you learn to see, you see the contradictions in the Bible. You learn, instead of the Bible judging you, you judge the Bible. You decide what's right and wrong in the Bible. Remember, as a Christian, how they said, let the Bible judge you, and so forth.
yeah, it was the kind of thing where you want the Bible to kind of be the basis and structure, and everything you do in your life, it all comes back to the Bible. And that's where I think the doctrine of inerrancy becomes both necessary and dangerous, because the first major chip in my foundation was when I realized that the Bible, it did have mistakes in history and contradictions and stuff like that. So if that's your very foundation and it's eroded, then what do you have left? You don't have anything else to go back to.
Right.
So I could see where he was trying to get away from that a little, but I think that also raises more problems. So it just kind of
one kind of intermediate way that you see, very liberal Christians try to deal with it, not me, but is to say that, well, the Bible's inspired in spots, and I'm inspired to spot the spots. So it's it's a way of again, like Bill said, I think it's a flawed way of looking at the Bible, but it's the idea that I'm going to judge the Bible instead of letting the Bible judge me.
Well, I mean, but you can look at it. There were people who identified, who spotted the text of the Bible that was supposed to be inerrant, like those who decided which pieces of the canon were when they assembled the canon in the 3rd, 4th centuries. There were people, they were spotting the spots. They were excluding the ones they thought were not worthy, and they were including the ones that were worthy. So they're doing the same thing, but it's longer ago in time.
Well,
so
and you pay attention to things like in Mark, there's no birth narrative. And then you have Matthew and Luke who have, contradictory birth narratives. Luke has a census that never took place, the world had a census. So the birth narrative is obviously fiction. I remember when I was at UNC, and just walking around, it's right next to where I was, and they said, oh, the birth narrative is fiction. I went, really? And then you got the trial of Jesus. They would have never let Barabbas go, and that's that whole thing of the atonement for sin. It's just a made-up story, and of course the miracles aren't true. So it really doesn't leave a lot left. To go. We'll go ahead.
Just thinking a month from now, I'd like for you to try any one of those arguments with Frank Turek.
Oh, you think I'm afraid of Frank Turek?
Yeah.
By the way, Frank Turek, his daughter went to UNC, where I went and took a Legends and Genesis class there, and that guy in 1 hour just destroyed the Noah flood thing. But she went for 4 weeks. She calls Frank and says, Dad, I'm not an atheist. I don't believe in God anymore. I'm an atheist. He runs down to UNC, drives 4 hours, and she's like, I'm done. I'm finished. So, and this is my speech to the Christians, and Ron's doing something you can explain a little bit, Ron, is you've got to inoculate these young people like yourself, because if they go to hear Bart Ehrman, they're just going to be blast. Their faith is going to take a blast. Am I right, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, if a kid grows up and his parents take him to church and make him go to Sunday school, and he learns that Jesus loves me, and he sees all the Bible characters on the flannel board, and he feels good about it, but he's never told that there are different perspectives, different positions,
Yeah.
that there are people who disagree, and if the parents and the church somehow don't teach the kid how to be a critical thinker,
Right.
and to decide for himself, for herself, whether or not Christianity is true based on all the evidence, then it's a shallow Christianity.
And I'll just
And a vulnerable Christianity.
And I'll just say that's one thing that the Catholic Church has gotten right, because it's continued to maintain that there is faith and reason in the
Right.
very fact that the Bible is there for us and what God is trying to communicate to us. And in fact, there's a really, really great encyclical written by John Paul II, which is Faith Feeds and Reason, and I recommend that to anybody.
Well, and what's sad is the church. I mean, he goes to Cottonwood, he does a thing with parents, how to teach them, their kids and so forth. But, in things like, I was watching this video on Hillsong, which is this church, you might as well be going to a rock concert. The church is just getting so hip. And now, they used to have Sunday school when I was, now it's just like no Sunday school. You got community groups where you talk about how you feel and what you're going through and all. So the typical Christian now just knows very little about the Bible even, and even less about modern scholarship and so forth. So the church is just getting worse and worse. It's terrible.
What they learn, to simplify or oversimplify, is what they believe. They don't learn why.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, just for a fact check, Frank doesn't have a daughter. He's telling a story about a guy who called him, whose daughter was out there. So.
Okay, I was wrong about that. I need to read it. I just read the introduction today.
Frank teaches daughter,
Bill is not an errant.
Yes, I never claimed to be an errant. No, I must have just. I wanted to read a little bit about
Wasn't it a Marine?
It was a Marine who called him.
Okay, the Marine called him.
Thanks for correcting me.
Frank was a Navy man.
Oh.
He has 2 sons. 2 or 3 sons, for sure.
So, okay.
There you go. Well,
We just don't want you to make that mistake. By the way, point of clarification, we are the first Friday of every month for the book club. However, this is going to be the last Friday of March, so we're going to have 2 in March.
oh, okay.
So the date on that again is
March 29th.
March 29th. So make sure you get your calendars marked. That's not going to be the first Friday. If you come here the first Friday, there won't be anybody here.
But may I add that on the next day, Saturday, he'll be one of the keynote speakers at the Rethink conference at Cottonwood in Allen.
Oh, wow. Good. What the guy?
I am.
So he's got a very busy trip to Texas.
I am. He is.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he's going to be earlier that day. He's going to be the speaker here at UTA.
I think that's on Friday, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Friday. So it's Saturday or Sunday. He's going to be at Rethink.
Saturday.
Okay, Saturday.
Friday night here.
Friday night here, so he's going to be extremely busy.
Yeah. In fact, I can give him a ride back from here if he needs a ride.
Okay.
Is he on Sunday morning though? Isn't he at Cottonwood Sunday morning? Do you know?
Yeah, I think he's actually got. I think they having him preach at
It's going to
Cottonwood
be a busy
on
week.
Sunday. But that's his life. Him and
Yeah, of
Wallace
course,
and these
yeah.
guys, they're so in demand.
He also wrote a book, The Atheist Thing, how,
I don't have enough faith.
which is catchy. I mean, he's got a catchy title.
I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
But see, the thing is with Ken and Chris, we didn't have enough faith to continue our Christianity. And one of the things he addresses is the principle of analogy. Are you guys familiar with that? What it means is we don't see people walking on the water today. You can go all over the world, nobody walks on water. So why in the world would you think, in a little outpost of the Roman Empire in Judea, you actually had someone that could walk on the water? We don't see people.
Don't you think that was just as unusual then as it would be now?
Oh no, they were a lot more superstitious then, and they saw a demon behind every tree. They believed literally in demons. When Paul's talking in his letter saying, Satan prevented me from going to Spain, he didn't mean it like we would say, oh, you just mean Satan kind of, you're just talking metaphorically. No, he meant Satan literally prevented him from going to Spain. That's what's so hard for Christians to grasp, is they had a whole different worldview, a whole different way of seeing things.
We believe in demons today, though. I don't
You
think
do
it'd
get
be
the
less than
few demon catchers
But-
here and there, but I mean, it's not like these guys were.
But if you have a kid that has epilepsy, you're not going to take him to an exorcist. You're going to take him to the district doctor.
So medical advances might play into what you're
Yeah,
saying.
absolutely,
We
yeah.
believe in the same stuff.
I mean, these people didn't know the most
Most
basic
evangelicals would think it's probably rare but you do have cases of demon possession, or even with you, Bill, is borderline in that area.
So then, of course,
Curious
today,
Just kidding.
so today we believe in photons and quarks and things
Right.
that are practically the same kind of
The strings are out.
yeah, I mean, multiverse universes and things like that.
But David Hume.
Still mythology.
You guys are familiar with David Hume. What's his book that he wrote?
Why I'm not a Christian.
An inquiry concerning human understanding.
Yeah, which is just still what he said is things go along pretty much by uniform physical laws. We don't see God intervening. We don't see supernatural things. So why in the world would you believe they are happening now today? So isn't it more likely that you had some, Jews that just thought they saw miracles and just made up stuff, or that someone actually walked on water? And another point is, and this is where scholarship comes in, is when you're a Christian, you don't see the little nuances. Like in Matthew, Peter walks on the water. Remember, Peter walks on the water. You've had a million sermons taught about, how he lost his faith, but then Jesus helped him up. That's only in Matthew. There's none of the other synoptics or John have Peter walking on water. So already, 15 years after Mark, you see the development of legendary material. And, so that...
But we don't know that.
Yeah,
It's
we don't know.
presumptuous to say it's legendary because one person said it and then the next person didn't. There's a lot of things in these.
Oh, I mean, it could. He could. Oh, darn.
Well,
Do you think Mark and I forgot the part about Peter walking on water? Let me get that fixed.
One of the
It's
I'm sure you're
exemption,
familiar
but
with
it's
this
not.
already. One of the Christian
story.
perspectives on that is that Mark was very defensive of Peter. This is Peter's gospel. And Peter doesn't look good in the story.
Yeah.
So he chose not to include that part of the story in it. That part of the story. But it's on the whole thing with, and I've talked about this before, it seems like we're in a lose-lose situation because if all four Gospels record something, then it's obviously plagiarism. If only one Gospel has it, then it's obviously embellishment. So it's just like, which do you want? Tell me what you want.
Well, I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want a Roman guard and a crazy angel and an earthquake when none of the other Gospels have it. I don't want dead saints walking through, downtown Jerusalem, which nobody else has. I want it to be somewhat consistent. These things are not tangential. These are core parts. And in the resurrection of Jesus, you have, in Mark, you have like one woman coming to the tomb and just kind of this shadowy male figure. And then they have two angels in Luke, and then they have a different number of eyewitnesses. You want your story to be consistent. Am I right, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between corroboration and collaboration, where if you have, it's one thing if you're telling the same story from different perspectives, where you can tell that they're independent, but where you have Matthew cribbing from Mark and Luke cribbing from Mark and all these other things coming together with only minor differences, then that doesn't really add to the credibility.
But even the cribbing, pejorative, it's like Luke comes right at the very beginning of his gospel and says, I carefully compared everything that had already been written before I sat down to write this.
Oh, we know that's true since Luke said that.
Of
course he would say that.
It's true because you see Luke copying Mark.
But
But he says he's going to.
I don't think it's controversial among even evangelical scholars that Matthew and Luke copied from.
Oh, no.
from
Yeah,
Mark.
that's what
And they redacted it like
cut and paste.
Yeah,
Like-
word for word. Yeah.
But
Matthew sees Jesus being baptized by John and goes, he's supposed to be baptizing John. He's the God. Why is he being baptized? And so he puts in, I'm not even worthy to untie your shoes. So, and that leads me to believe there's a historical core, because instead of him changing the whole thing, he just corrects Mark. So,
Well, one of the things too, the later Gospels, I think it would be a natural thing that as you travel around preaching, and all of this has an earlier oral tradition to it, is you get a lot of people saying, hey, I read Mark's Gospel, and I have a huge question here on why is Mark... He said, well, he didn't tell you the whole story, you know, so when you go back, you select, I'm going to tell a little bit more in detail to answer the question that everybody seems to be having about this.
Well, but that's one apologetic, but I think the more reasonable thing, and what do you guys think of and Price goes into this, how legends, the Christian apologetic is, oh, that legendary material could not have happened that quickly, that soon to the event. Legends happen very quickly. Like Price talks about the Virgin Mary, how they had legend just sprang up almost instantaneously. And he talks.
I thought that was one of his stronger cases that he made about the legend doesn't take 6 or 8 decades. It can continue very quickly.
Case. I remember that being compelling to me when I first read it.
And what he explained to everybody what that is.
Well, it was a Jewish Messiah type figure in the 17th
Italy
century.
or whatever.
And he had a lot of followers, but towards the end of his life, he apostatized to Islam.
Became a Muslim. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he was under threat, or duress.
And they started making up stuff.
One of the things that I didn't get a chance to research, but a question that I had is the accounts that we have that document this, are they 20 or 30 years after it historically happened, or are they contemporary within 2 or 3 years of the event?
Well, it was in a more modern period. My understanding was that it was fairly recently after the events, or within his lifetime.
I just had the question. It would be.
Yeah, it would be good to look into that more. But the point of it, the whole thing, why he brought it up was there were tons of legends that came up around him, miracles and all kinds of things that were incredible. But yet even his apostasy didn't squelch
that was a good
belief
point.
in those miracles.
Well, even today you got the Roswell thing where it was just a balloon, some tinfoil, and before you know it, you got aliens running all over the place. I mean, that happened very quickly.
Careful, you're on thin ice. They're talking about my favorite place. Every month, Bill, we basically have the same approach, and it's almost as if we treat the gospel writers as if they were 4 guys that decided one day, let's go down and write a biography of Jesus' life and ministry. It wasn't that way. Now, who knows where the 4 writers were and what their motivation was to write what they wrote when they wrote it. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly no what do you call it in a college paper, no guidelines as to what they had to include or not include.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Any other comments? I could run that video, that first part of the interview if you'd like. I'm going to do that. Yeah, Dr. Price was kind enough to give us time and take questions ahead of time, and wanted to be able to address the club. He might be watching live now. I don't know if he's on Facebook watching us right now, but he was certainly invited to do so. So this is the first part of a 3-part interview. This is the long one. This is like 10 minutes, and this was an interview from Monday.
Yeah, my name is James Walker, and I'm co-founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club, which is a monthly gathering of both believers and skeptics, and we're respectfully discussing books from both perspectives. Our book for the month of March 1st, is going to be the book Beyond Born Again by Dr. Robert Price. And Dr. Price was kind enough to join us for a Skype interview, a video conference interview, where he can address some of the questions that the club members have had. And let me just say thank you so much, Dr. Price, for giving us your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Let me just give the background for those who will be watching this who have not had a chance to read Beyond Born Again or any of your other works. Dr. Price is a former, I guess it's fair to say, former evangelical Christian.
Oh, yeah.
Pastor of a church. That was great, interesting to me because, of course, we read some of your stuff much more recently than Beyond Born Again. So it's almost like a frozen in time snapshot of where you were on your theological journey. You would, at that time, I think, still identify as a Christian of some type, like you said, beyond born again Christian or beyond traditional evangelical. But of course, that's not where the journey stops. So you're kind of pretty much well known now for your as being a mythicist and believing that the historical Jesus never really existed. So that's like way beyond born again.
Yeah, that's right. When I was a pastor, I was not an evangelical anymore. I still did, of course, identify as a Christian, but kind of in the Tillich and Bultmann end of things. But while I was a pastor, under the influence of reading Derrida and deconstructivist critics, I began to think, gee, I'm not so sure about idealistic with a capital I metaphysics anymore. And I still sort of hung on to a Christian identity, kind of in the Thomas Altizer version of a so-called Christian atheism. There is like a long tradition of non-theistic religion, like in Hinduism, etc. And this was sort of a Christian version. And I went to church, still the Episcopal Church. I had been a Baptist pastor, but I found it an edifying and uplifting thing, and just that it didn't beg questions of history or philosophy. Those are different realms.
It's kind of interesting. Two of our club members regularly, pretty regularly attend church, but they're atheists. So I don't know if it's partly that they're just as a kind of a social experiment, or they're just curious to see how the other half lives. But our co-founder Bill Cluck is one of them. He's almost as faithful to go to church as I am. I'm on the Christian side of that equation. So you're not the only one that continued to go to church when you were not a traditional theist.
Yeah, one reason for that was I began to think that it doesn't really depend on questions of belief and intellectual assent. I guess that's sort of the Tillich legacy, that doubt and faith are not opposites. They sort of depend on one another. And I thought, if this is an edifying experience, if it provides a perspective on oneself that is as if looking at it from outside, that's pretty good. And the magic of the liturgy I found to be well, like what Peter Berger calls it creates a finite province of meaning. It's like a theatrical experience. You're changed by it for the better. And I wasn't hostile to Christianity, even in Beyond Born Again. I didn't consider myself an evangelical, but I was trying to say there are an awful lot of aspects of this that seem to me childish and abusive, though well-intended, but I thought misaimed. And there are a lot of defenses for it that are just so inadequate that they invite unbelief. And so my approach there was to say, not why don't you stop being an evangelical, why don't you stop being a Christian. Rather, the point was to say, your faith is not necessarily dependent on what I now think are poor arguments. And it's a question of maturing past some stuff that I thought was pretty silly and self-defeating.
Is the end game, would you say today, because obviously you've grown, you've matured a lot yourself since writing Beyond Born Again. So is that the end goal? Would you say the uber mature Christian is going to be a mythicist?
Oh, no, that's I'm glad you pointed that out. To me, that's really a whole different ball game. I'm not sure you could come up with a version of evangelicalism based on mythicism, though I think I have known a couple of people that thought they could. To me, that's sort of desperate. I still have respect for evangelical Christians, and I know that for some reason this is supposed to be a stupid cliche, but some of my best friends are evangelical Christians. And when we talk about these matters, I find myself getting indignant, as I have at the misrepresentation of historic Christianity by people that think they are the defenders of it, but are making a laughing stock of it. I'm not really. I don't advocate for atheism. I don't even advocate for mythicism in the sense that it's some sort of dogma with me. I'm always pretty careful to say, in historical matters, judgments have to be provisional, and you can really do little more than than to say this paradigm, this model is instructive and illuminating, and who knows if it's true? We'll never know that. I don't. Yeah.
I want to get back to that in just a minute. I do have a question here from Jim Hall, one of our club members at the Atheist Christian Book Club. Jim's also the host of the Atheist Edge podcast. So he is a skeptic and atheist. That he quotes you, and he has a question for you. He quotes you saying, "A kindred appeal to eyewitnesses technically does not depend on direct eyewitness authorship of the finished Gospels. Here, apologists are content to argue the Gospels represent the end product of a process of oral tradition." So he quotes that, and then he has a question about it. My question is, Jim asks, how would you respond to an apologist's claim that sniffing out false data and practices like in Galatians, Timothy's letters, epistles of John, etc., or updating and correcting those in need of it, and he gives some examples of that, was one of the main objects of the apostles' preaching? Was the apostles' preaching part of it, and I'll just reword it for him, to be able to fact check the data, so to speak?
Well, there is a lot of polemic and correction in the epistles, though I think it's interesting to note that this is theological debate, where, like in Galatians, you're saying, you know, if you think you still have to keep the Torah, aren't you really negating any significance to the death of Christ? I mean, what difference would it have made? This kind of logical implication argument, it seems to me very different than somebody operating a kind of Snopes.com thing where they try to track down the validity of stories. Or did Jesus actually say this? I don't see any reason to think that that was part of the agenda or that anybody would have cared. I mean, I don't know one way or the other, but there are, I think, convincing arguments for various gospel sayings being anachronistic and secondary and likely stemming from Christian prophecy, or just the thing we see so often where people say essentially, I said it, God believes it, that settles it. You figure, well, my views are true, and Jesus was at least as smart as I am, so he must have thought this. And you still see billboards with cute little statements, and it's signed God or Jesus. Where do you get this? Well, of course, they don't literally mean it, but then do we know that the early Christians did? So I don't know that there's any reason to think they would have done this fact-checking, or if it would have been possible anyhow by the time the Gospels were written. And the oral tradition, there might well be eyewitness material in that, but like Martin Luther said about Catholic Church tradition, it's way too late to find out.
What were your thoughts on that?
I'd like to ask him what he meant by the magic that transformed him with the liturgy of going to church. What is magic?
He just enjoys the ceremony and the pomp.
Where is that materially?
I don't. Maybe Ken would have a better idea. And you've read some of his later books. Is he a thoroughgoing materialist? Is he at the point where matter is all that there is?
I mean, he identifies as an atheist, so I would think that's probably where he's coming from. But I don't think he's adamant about his atheism. He's probably more of an agnostic.
Well, he said he doesn't lobby for it. How did he put it? He says, I don't.
He's not combative. Those aren't his words.
He doesn't push for it. He doesn't. But he says he doesn't even push for mythicism. But he's written whole books on the topic.
Yes, it's kind of odd because seemed to be saying quite a bit that he really doesn't know how anybody really knows.
Well, and I got that statement. I really like what he said. And I can understand. I see that whole pervasive idea that really we can't know truth at all. It's almost like a kind of an existential, Kierkegaardian idea that you can just put forth models, and you can choose to hold to that model, but nobody can ever know anything.
Well, what he's saying is,
you know, so excuse me, yeah, so here again we have kind of this interesting conundrum where there are people that, you know, love to just, let's just call that mental masturbation on this kind of thing. But yet, if you look at the humanity as a whole, there is this sort of cry for truth, this sort of necessity that we have, that we judge everything in the finite and in the universal. And so, to that extent, there's something ultimate there that we have to deal with, and it's not material necessarily.
He had a thing that came up in the book. I asked him about. We were having a little bit of audio problems during the interview, so I think this part didn't make the cut because we were having some dropouts. But he had a place. You remember where he talks about that evangelicals love to hear stories of former cultists who saw the light and became evangelicals. He mentioned the Unification Church, or Moonies especially, and he implied that that these stories of seeing the light and leaving this bad organization and coming to truth are you know, pretty superficial and you know, biased and not very trustworthy. And I asked him about that, and I said, it seems to me like that's your story. You know, you were an evangelical Christian and you discovered the evils and problems with that, and you came out to the light of, I guess, ultimately mythicism, or wherever you ended up, way beyond born again. But are we to take that same idea that we can't trust, or that it somehow lacks value because you were a former member? And he said, no, because I'm still friends with evangelicals and I'm not out to, you know, attack. And he said, I'm not like, you know, those like former Mormons. And he said, you know, that they can just be awfully mean about the whole thing. And I said, well, you know, don't paint with too broad of a brush. I'm a former Mormon. He said, we're not all former Mormons. So, but anyway, it was, he does a really good job of being critical and dismissive of apologetics, but he's doing apologetics while he's doing it. You know, so it's again, and we talk about this at the very end of the last, I think, part 3, about how difficult it is to compensate for your own biases. And you know, it's just like you look at the data, and I say, well, I'm looking at it objectively. Well, I'm trying to look at it objectively.
But he does say these historical pronouncements have to be tentative and provisional. Okay, that. For example, the trial of Jesus, you know, where he rents his clothes and he says the Son of Man. I mean, that might have happened, but it might not have. I mean, it's tentative. Right?
This is why I see it doesn't go both ways, though, because you watch his debate with, when he does the debate with, Bart Ehrman, he's not tentative and provisional. I mean, he's making a strong case that Jesus never existed. So it's and maybe that's back to the same problem that I have and we all have. It's very difficult to just take to look at it objectively without carrying all the baggage of what we already believe in our worldview.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's like a zebra changing its spots. You can't help it. You know,
one of the things I found a little bit confusing about the end of the book, he had an appendix where he talks about evangelicals, former evangelicals who become combative and attack their former faith. And he was saying there's nothing more pathetic than somebody who is, you know, a believer and now they're just turned into a mirror image of themselves. Now they're a fundamentalist, atheist, or anti-Christian. And yet, you know, the whole tenor of the book I found to be very, very critical of evangelicalism. I mean, he says it's not, but I mean, I felt attacked as an evangelical.
I will say that I think he was dismissive in areas and sarcastic in areas a little bit, but what I liked about his book was he was very well read. Yeah. And he had a broad, I mean, he really has looked at from A to Z in evangelical. So he's showing parallels between like exorcists, like Ida Mae, Pigs in the Parlor book, and then with you know, scholarly apologists, and showing, well, I guess that does kind of sound similar when you put those two quotes together and stuff. So he did a great job of that, and so, you know, like I've always said before, I can put up with a lot of sarcasm as long as there's some gold in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what kind of grabbed me in when I was reading it the first time. It's like, this guy knows what he's talking about. Yeah. I had been led to believe that that all the non-Christians or anti-evangelicals were just clueless. You know, they just didn't know what they were talking about. But clearly, this guy, he knew what he was talking about. And so that
He
kind of
was one of us. He's
destabilized
not a
me,
fake.
yeah.
You know, he's not.
And furthermore, I think one service that Price provides in this book that I think is valuable. I don't agree with everything that Price believes. I don't agree with him politically. I don't agree with him on mythicism. There's a lot of things where we disagree. But you know, he was formative in my deconversion. But one thing I do appreciate is, and I think this is kind of a message to apologists, I should say. You know, a lot of us non-Christians have read basically all the apologetics arguments that are out there, right? And what kind of turns us off is when an apologetic message is being given to us in such a way that it's being portrayed as something that we haven't heard before, or that this is gonna beat you into submission, you know, if you're honest with yourself. But we've evaluated them. We found them wanting, and I feel like there's not, when we try to point out where it's wanting, there's a lack of receptivity to why it's wanting. There's not a, like, for example, when the topic of Jesus' failure to come back in the first century comes up, it's, you know, there's always these stock arguments. Well, the transfiguration happened right after he talked about that, or, you know, or it was in this generation. And, you know, this generation could be in that generation. There's an ambiguity there. There's all these things. It's like we've heard these before. Now let us have a say. Let us explain to you why all non-evangelical scholars accept that Jesus falsely prophesied his return in that generation. There's a reason for it. It can't be just easily dismissed. And when there's these glib comebacks,
that's
it
when,
turns us away.
and see, Paul said to the Thessalonians, the earliest letter, First Thessalonians, said, "Don't quit your day job," you know, because they were waiting for it right around. So his followers were expecting it. And there's a book by Barterman called "Jesus, the Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium," right. And he lays out the scholarship has been this way since Albert Schweitzer wrote his book in 1905, that Jesus is best viewed as an apocalyptic prophet who thought the world was going to end in his lifetime.
Dale Allison, he's a strong Christian. He identifies as a strong Christian, but he's written books and books on this whole topic. It's not just something you can attack in a soundbite.
And even in the Gospels, you get this great evidence that Jesus was an apocalyptic. Because what do you have? You have the sons of thunder, you know, John, sons of Zebedee, saying, "Lord, who's going to sit on your right and left hand?" You know, I think their mom put him up to it again. Hey, we want seats at the dance here.
Do you think that really happened?
Huh?
Do you think that really
That's
happened?
it. So, yeah, great question. Was that historical? And I think it is. But we'll look in the Jesus Seminar book.
Well,
you know,
I want to make a comment.
It shows they were thinking way ahead. Like, hey, where are we going to be here?
If I may, I'd like to comment on what Ken said. You got to realize that people like Frank Turek, they, when they're taking questions from a university secular audience, they're not taking questions from people with your knowledge. So when you hear the responses to those people have very often just picked up sound bites or a YouTube video or a Twitter feed and are asking their questions as though
they don't know the details and nuances.
And
we're not even close to where
it's almost like trading sound bites, because you can't. A great question. I do Q&A all the time on everything from Islam to Mormonism to atheism, you know, from a Christian perspective. And even if it's a really, really good question, you have to answer in a soundbite. This is a Q&A. I've got 90 seconds max maybe to try to give an answer to that. So what you can just do is give an idea. And yes, it's superficial. I mean, the question was a soundbite and the answer is a soundbite. And it's better to write a whole book on the topic and try to dig into those books. And that's what we try to do in the book club.
I think we're on both sides are guilty to a certain extent of thinking that our answers are, or our arguments are much better than the others, and if we could just get that across to you, you would see the light, you know. But both sides have in many cases have thought these things very well through. There's popular apologists, and then there's very scholarly ones, and oftentimes all we hear is the popular ones, and they're easy to skewer.
And I think for the evangelical, it's frustrating. It can be frustrating when you say, well, you know, this is an obvious mistake in the Bible because of X. And it's like no one's ever heard that before, and nobody has discussed that, and whole books haven't been written about that. And I'm very satisfied with the answer, but I can understand how you might not be. But to be, you don't want to hear the dismissive, like you say, like I've never heard this before. Yeah, right. And so it works both ways. You're absolutely right. And one of the things we try to do in this book club is to try to steel man, not straw man. Let me, I heard what you said. Let me see if I can say it even better than you. And then what do we think about this? And I think part of it is trying to be. I mean, this group will make you humble, because you think it's like I've said before. Everything I say sounds brilliant in church, but I come here and you guys will shoot me down in a minute. I better make sure I'm saying it right. So it's it helps to be able to really understand the argument. And this is why I think I really like you to read the book if possible. The video's better than nothing. And I kind of against this idea of, well, I'm just going to read a Christian critique of the book.
No.
Well, no, you're not dealing with the author. You need to deal with the first-hand idea, or I know it's entertaining stuff, but who's the guy that does An Atheist Reads?
We just Steve Shives. Steve Shives.
Yes, yeah. Okay. Well, you're getting his take on what he's pulled out of low-hanging fruit. So it's not the same as actually reading the book and interacting with the author.
Would you have to say yours?
So I just wanted to comment, and so to preface this, I did not read the book, so I'm just going on his commentary in the interview.
My legendary embellishment.
Yeah. So, but like one thing that bothers me, I've heard this argument a lot. I don't know very many mythicists, but I've heard the argument a lot from atheists when it comes to historical data. So like anything out of the Bible, anything that they say is quote unquote ancient, for the argument that you just can't trust it, because how do we really know what they meant?
Like Caesar crossing the Rubicon, how do we know it really happened?
Or any of it, like he was suggesting is, well, how do we know that any of these were historical events? It might have been just legend. We don't know how they felt about it. We don't, as if like we can't know anything about it because it's historical. But I mean that's like there's a fallacy in that, and like that's a philosophical argument. Like philosophy says that you really can't know anything other than the fact that you think, and you can disprove all these things. Well, it's not a historical argument. Like if it's a historical argument, then nothing that we do in historical scholarship would hold any credence. But yet it does.
There's levels of probability. A historian will give, this is 90% probable, this is 50%, that sort of thing. Well, there's nothing that's 100%.
And that's fair. Later in the debate, I'm going to ask him about that, because how much in the he's a fellow of the Jesus Seminar, and I wanted to know exactly how that works and who else is in it, how many other mythicists are part of this Jesus Seminar, and how much of it is based just on a anti-supernatural bias. And he'll address that and kind of have a decent answer to that question.
But remember, Robert Price is on left field on a lot of things. Like I don't think he believes any of the Pauline epistles are written by Paul. Now, you go to any university, any scholar just about, and they'll say Galatians solid, Romans solid, Corinthians solid, Timothy no way. The things like Timothy, Titus, those are not written by Paul. The pastoral
Second Thessalonians.
Second Thessalonians. Second Peter, obviously not written by Peter. Not the same writing style as First Peter. Ephesians, probably not written by
That's more debatable.
Paul. Yes,
we're going to take a
long sentence.
We're going to take a break right now, but right before the break, and we're going to have some coffee in there, some refreshments, restroom break, whatever, for 10 minutes. But before we do, I want Bill, if he would be so kind, as to give a little commercial for the Bible Geek, the podcast.
Oh, I've been listening to that for years, and so have you, Ken, right?
Only off and on.
But he had.
This is with Robert Price. He does this very popular podcast called The Bible Geek.
And they'll have like 8 questions a night, and they're very high scholarship, very intellectual, very biblically knowledgeable people, and he'll answer them, and it's just fascinating. But I fall asleep every time I listen to it, like midway, because it's so dry. But it's just fascinating because. Yeah, but yeah, don't you enjoy it?
I can't really say deep, then
My wife thinks that.
Private passing, yeah. I mean,
So,
well, you know, this stuff's not for everybody.
Our Facebook Live audience, just hang with us about 10 minutes, and be sure to put your questions there. If you have a question, we'll try to take that as well. We'll be back in 10 minutes.